I am Pardieu, a holy man. In reaching the 9th level, I have acquired many magic spells and charms, the greatest of which is the graven eye of Timur. But I also have a sword, which I only use should my magic fail me.
In his first film starring as the lead, Tom Hanks plays a college student obsessed with a real-life role-playing game, eventually alienating his family and girlfriend as his psyche refuses to accept the fact that the fantasy world in which he wrapped his entire personality wasn't real, predating the incel subculture by almost 30 years. And spoilers for the following Scooby-Doo episodes.
Scooby, Scooby-Doo, Scooby, Scooby-Doo.
The gang visits a spooky castle so Daphne can cover a convention for fans of a popular magic-themed role-playing game. They soon find themselves at the mercy of the Wizard of the Tower, who forces them to conquer his dungeon. Will they complete the quest and join the rest of the conventioneers? Or are they doomed to spend the rest of their lives dodging monsters in a stone labyrinth?
I'll lower that drawbridge in no time! Castle Gate, lower your weight!
I should get Scrappy to use that spell on me. Also, in this episode, Scrappy can use magic, apparently. This is the second episode of this series that does not follow the Scooby formula. The Wizard of the Tower wasn't so much a villain as an overenthusiastic convention host and had no evil intentions other than making Daphne and the rest play his game. Thus, as with Scooby-Geist, I'll just spend a little time giving my thoughts. It's obvious from the title and premise that the producers were inspired by the then burgeoning popularity of the Dungeons & Dragons role-playing game. However, with the players going through the castle in real life, rather than rolling dice on a wobbly card table while chugging cans of soda, this was more LARPing than anything else. For those who played sports in high school, LARP stands for Live Action Role-Playing and is essentially an advanced version of kids playing pretend at recess.
Lightning bolt! Sleep! Lightning bolt! Lightning bolt! Sleep!
I'm being a bit flippant as D&D and LARPing are practically mainstream these days, with even Hollywood action film stars like Vin Diesel and Henry Cavill being fond of pastimes that were once considered swirly-worthy. Swirly-worthy. Swirly-worthy, 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 swirly-worthy. Ha! This Scooby episode wasn't the first to bring the role-playing game to Saturday morning television. TSR licensed an official animated series based on their Dungeons & Dragons property, which began airing on a rival network a month before the new Scooby and Scrappy-Doo show. Never one to miss a trend, even if they're 5 or 10 years late for it, Hanna-Barbera had to devote at least one Scooby episode to fantasy role-playing.
This is the really important part, Uncle Scooby. If the Yadzrook shows up, say, Shazak Lintaz, and it'll disappear.
What is the magic word? Yadzrook Rimrock. One way, rolling. Like this, rolling. First one, Rimrock.
When thou retrievest the book from its cradle, you must recite the words Klaatu, Verata, Niktu.
Klaatu, Barata, necktie, nectar, nickel.
Considering what was going on in the United States at the time this episode was produced, basing a Saturday morning cartoon on Dungeons & Dragons was not only brave, but borderline insane, as this was during the heyday of the 1980s Satanic Panic. The Satanic Panic refers to a period from the late 1970s to roughly the early 1990s when a large portion of U.S. Christians were convinced that there was a well-organized movement of Satanists and other devil-worshipping cults participating in ritualistic murders and sex crimes. Anything in pop culture that even hinted at putting witchcraft or other supernatural forces in a positive light came under fire from overzealous parent groups and church committees. The rising popularity of Dungeons & Dragons led to several fundamentalist organizations claiming the game was merely a gateway into the occult for impressionable children. This included a popular Jack Chick tract, Dark Dungeons, which attempted to spread fear and disinformation about RPGs by claiming that in addition to allowing players to achieve real magic powers, they would also lead to self-harm. Setting the latter aside, if I'd have been told that playing card games would have given me telekinesis, I wouldn't have minded all the hours of my life my mother wasted by making me play skip-bo with her. There had even been a television movie that aired the year before this episode called Mazes and Monsters, about players having their lives ruined after getting swept up in the fervor of a fictional RPG. This, in turn, had been based on a book inspired by real-life reports of Dungeons & Dragons players who took things too far by acting out their game fantasies in real life, or who otherwise ruined their lives by playing. All these accounts were either greatly exaggerated, or simply bullshit. But hey, why let the truth get in the way of making a buck over a nice, juicy moral panic? This kind of misplaced religious censorship should sound very familiar to members of the generation after mine who grew up on Harry Potter. Though now that J.K. Rowling is a monster, many of the same people who attacked her in the late 1990s and early 2000s think she's just the greatest now. It's also interesting that one of the voice actors from the original Dungeons & Dragons cartoon, Willie Ames, went on to become a Christian fundamentalist who starred in all those Bible Man videos.
Mystical wand, magic device, take this castle of fire and ice, remove the spell of the one in the tower, and give to me the wizard's power.
Now I summon ancient power. This is evil's finest power!
Surprisingly, growing up as a nerd who loved fantasy and computer games, I never got into Dungeons & Dragons in my youth. This wasn't for lack of trying, but few kids my age at the time, if any, had been into RPGs in my tiny corner of the Midwest. Ironically, almost every friend I made later in life played the game heavily as a teenager. It's been suggested that you're never too old to pick up a character sheet and find a group now, but who has time for that? This Scooby episode, unfortunately, had nothing going for it. There wasn't much of a story, as it was just a series of encounters the gang had with various threats in the tower. There was no mystery to solve, and nobody ever seemed to be in any danger. It felt for all the world like watching your kid wander around the house looking for the hidden basket of candy on Easter Sunday. Having said that, this episode had to have what is easily my favorite moment so far in this entire season. Possibly even in the entire middle era of the Scooby franchise.
Third level, lots of luck.
Like what did you say, Scoop?
I don't know, Frankie.
That was amazing. Wizards and Warlocks was a good illustration of the anything goes philosophy seemingly held by the Scooby producers at the time. This season not only featured an episode with real ghosts, this one established that not only did magic exist, but Scrappy was able to use it. You can't just say it was all special effects in the Wizard's Tower either, because no amount of hidden projectors or laser holograms would explain everything that occurred. Here's a supercut of all the times magic happened in the episode.
Castle Gate, lower your weight.
Pretty strong magic.
Yay! But I'm not with you. Yay!
Oh, I know all about you, and Daphne, and Scrappy. Would you begin?
That wizard has done something to them, I just know it.
Zastra! Put our friend Shaggy back to rights. Takaparaz! Takapafizz!
Scrappy! Daphne!
Daphne?
Like okay, but I don't like it. And like fast food too!
We've had enough of this stupid turkey. Sangrazi!
Right rock, rim rock.
The wizard's power!
Say the magic word! Wind talk!
Belroth Wind Towel!
There they are!
Awaken!
Hail, Scrappy! Abracadabra!
Abracazak!
None of that was ever explained.
What's that?
Look out! Squidman!
Wait, Scrappy was right! That's the Yazrook!
I wasn't sure if names like Squidmets or Yadzruck had any hidden meaning or were just nonsense gibberish words made up by the writer to sound D&D-ish. For what it's worth, an anagram of Squidmets is Dim Quests, which could go a long way toward explaining this episode's premise. Yadzruck, meanwhile, had nothing interesting as an anagram. Unless your name happens to be Zach Rudy.
Scrappy, you're glowing!
Perhaps there's another undiscovered uranium mine nearby. Daphne and the rest arrive at the set of a popular television soap opera after hearing reports of mysterious happenings. While attempting to hide from the villain, Scooby is mistaken for an actress and immediately tasked by the show's director to replace the recently kidnapped female lead. Will the talking canine become America's next big rising star, or just another victim of the Phantom of the Soaps?
We're losing him, Doctor.
A station with the call letters KZZZ does exist in the real world, but it's an AM radio station in Arizona and not television. However, they had different call letters at the time this episode aired, and the FCC didn't assign them with KZZ until the year 2000. After that station changed its format to talk radio. AM talk radio. Those three Z's could not have picked a better station to represent.
Gee, Uncle Scooby, this is exciting! Going to watch a real live TV show like Genuine Hospital.
Why is Scrappy so excited? He is not the demographic for a daytime soap opera.
Like what's so important about a dumb old soap opera, Daphne?
That was the correct attitude to have. Frankly, if I was Shaggy, I'd be hoping for a monster to pop up and distract me from the soap opera. If I sound a little harsh talking about them, that's because as a kid, the grown-ups in my life were hooked on soap operas, and before I was old enough to go to school or during snow days and vacations, daytime television often meant hours of boredom for me. Bitter over the imminent release from his contract for the popular soap opera Genuine Hospital, star Danny Devine decided to ruin the show for everyone else via sabotage.
Sabotage? How? When?
When not in front of the camera, he disguised himself as the Phantom of the Soaps, allowing him to disrupt the production anonymously, doing things like kidnapping other actors or flooding the stage to prevent filming.
By stealing the show's star, Genuine Hospital will come to its end.
Genuine Hospital is an obvious reference to the real-life soap opera General Hospital. I'm not gonna lie, I had no idea that show was still running. Hell, I had no idea any soap opera was still running. I would have thought all the Lifetime original movies would have filled that particular programming niche.
Help! Somebody stop this creep!
Stop him! He's kidnapped Victoria Sensible, the star of my show!
Victoria Sensible. There are times when the references to real-life people in these Scooby episodes just hit. In this case, it's Victoria Principal, one of the stars of the then popular primetime soap opera Dallas.
Hey, wait a minute! What's going on here?
Quiet! Can't you see that there are sick people in this hospital?
Ordinarily, I'd point out how once again, Scooby was in drag. But that's pretty much the premise of this entire episode.
Scoobsy, huh? Well, Scoobsy baby, I'm gonna make you a star, sweetheart!
Tootsie was a 1982 film starring Dustin Hoffman as an out-of-work actor so desperate to land a role that he dressed as a woman to successfully audition for a part in a popular soap opera. It was one of the top-grossing movies at the time, but not one that seems to be discussed much these days, possibly due to the charged political climate when it comes to gender roles. For what it's worth, Tootsie was a fairly progressive and mature examination of cross-dressing for the time. In addition, Scoopsy also includes recognizable elements from the Phantom of the Opera, including the villain dressed in Victorian-era clothing and kidnapping an actress. Actually, those are the only elements borrowed from the Phantom of the Opera, as most of the episode is focused on the Tootsie parody.
Yes, I am the star of Genuine Hospital, assuming that there still is a genuine hospital.
Perhaps Danny Devine was so upset at the production because they couldn't get his name right on his dressing room door. Danny Devine?
I was going to be taken out of the show, so I tried to ruin everything.
Devine's motivation for his crime was revenge over being fired from the soap opera, which makes this a purely ego-driven plot. As with other Scooby villain schemes that weren't focused on a monetary payout, we must rate the value differently because while not profitable, revenge is worth it for the one who felt wronged, provided it's not at the expense of everything else in their life.
Just one picture.
Huh? Wait!
Thanks, Mr. Devine.
Oh, dear.
Wait a minute. Now his name is spelled correctly. Early 1980s Hanna-Barbera did not give a fuck. We have seen villains work to disrupt film sets before, and for reasons not related to money. But Devine had nothing to lose by halting production, as he was already set to lose his job. Unlike someone else we could mention, whose actions would have only hurt him in the long run. Carl the Stuntman. Devine's scheme should have been difficult to get away with, considering Genuine Hospital was a successful show and no doubt a significant moneymaker for the studio. The production company would normally have devoted a lot of resources to bringing an end to the Phantom's shenanigans, as they would do for anything else that delayed filming. Even if they wanted to avoid potential public scandal by not involving the police, despite having one of their actors kidnapped right off the set in front of several witnesses, they would have at least hired extra guards to keep the remaining cast and crew safe.
Yummy! Lunch!
Yeah, lunch!
Yeah!
Where in the hell is security right now? Nobody was stopping the gang from wandering around what was presumably a closed set.
Come back here, you two! That's studio property!
Oh, my mistake. They did have security. It was just really shitty security. Considering how poorly the set was protected, not to mention how few crew members were around, Devine seemed to have had complete unfettered access to the entire studio, making it seem unlikely for him to get caught. However, it had to have been only a matter of time before an executive finally lifted his head from a pile of cocaine long enough to fire whoever was in charge of security and bring in someone more competent to fix things. I do wonder why the studio would have canceled Devine's contract. Actors leave productions all the time, but it's rare for the star of a TV series to be forced out without a good reason. Sometimes it's because their character just isn't popular with the fans anymore, or the writers and producers decide to go in a different direction. Usually, though, when a lead actor leaves a series, it's because of one of four reasons. First, they become famous enough that they leave to join a more popular show or even headline their own series, or they make the jump to film. Second, they become so popular, or feel that they have, to insist on more money from the producers who refuse to meet their demands. Third, they die in real life. And finally, they simply become too difficult to work with, either because of ego or substance abuse. This puts the entire production in trouble trying to accommodate the ever-growing issues forced on them by a problem actor, with the studio ultimately deciding to gamble on replacing or removing them and hoping the series will survive their departure. Considering how Devine tried shutting down Genuine Hospital after being let go suggests that it was not his choice to leave the series. And his violent reaction also makes it apparent he was probably a difficult actor to work with. Getting fired under these conditions could result in him not landing any lucrative parts in the future, as he would probably be blacklisted by other soap operas, who didn't want to introduce a toxic performer to their ensemble. While certainly no excuse for his actions, this theory would further explain his motivation for doing what he did. Divine's plan wasn't going to make him any money, but it also wasn't going to cost him anything either, as he had already lost his job. The lax security and the producer's seeming unwillingness to contact the authorities also implies he had a good chance to get away with things for a while. However, at some point the studio would be forced to pursue more effective means to stop the Phantom, making Divine's revenge scheme ultimately pointless. He gets a 2.5 out of 5 for the design. The Phantom of the soaps was an extremely boring villain. Let alone not having any special effects, his outfit was nothing more than a domino mask, top hat, and cape. Even worse, it was literally worn over his normal clothing. Seriously. When Divine was introduced, he was wearing a blue blazer and tie, white dress shirt, black vest, gray slacks, and black shoes. Whenever the Phantom appeared, in addition to the aforementioned mask, hat, and cape, he was wearing a blue blazer and tie, white dress shirt, black vest, gray slacks, and black shoes. Even worse, Divine was a well-known star, yet he wore a mask that covered very little of his face, and his hair would occasionally peek out from under the hat, revealing its color. Anyone on the set should have had no problem identifying him.
Scrappy, look up there on the catwalks!
On the catwalk, yeah.
To be fair, he was usually seen in the episode attacking from above the stage, so it's possible that he was far enough away that the rest of the cast and crew would have had some difficulty identifying him. But come on. Divine was literally wearing all the same clothes as the Phantom. There was no excuse for such laziness. This episode was set in a television studio, and Divine would have had access to masks, or at the very least makeup, as well as any number of costume choices that would have been much more effective than the Phantom disguise he settled on. He could have at least worn fake fangs or painted his face white, though in his defense that would have made it difficult for quick changes should he be unexpectedly called to the set. For such a pathetic villain's costume, that's all I have to say about that. It gets a 1 out of 5 for the outfit. The episode began with the usual worst thing a villain can do.
Huh? What? The Phantom of the Soap strikes again!
This was one of the rare Scooby kidnappings that did not fall within the FRED scale, as Victoria Sensible wasn't a friend, relative, enemy, or Daphne. Nevertheless, that didn't make it any less dumb for the villain to do. In fact, it's much worse for him, as she was a female lead on the show, which would ordinarily make it that much more important for the studio to get her back. The fact that they didn't call the police is baffling.
You captured the Phantom!
I did? And there's Victoria Sensible, my missing star.
Then again, the police may not have even needed to be summoned, considering Divine not only left his victim in the studio, and not only in an unlocked room, but in a room with the door wide open. It appeared as though Sensible might have had her hands tied behind her, but her legs weren't bound, and she could have walked out of that room at any time. Did she stay because she was secretly working with Divine? Had he physically threatened Sensible to make her too afraid to escape? Did she not care whether the show got canceled because she would get paid either way? This might be the episode's biggest mystery. Well, second biggest, right after how Sensible's hair mysteriously changed color between close-up and wide shots. It really was suspicious how nobody called the police. Of course, with all the money on the line, had Genuine Hospital not aired, it's conceivable that the producers decided to delay contacting the authorities until after the episode was completed. But Sensible's abduction shouldn't have been much of an issue anyway.
We go on the air in 15 minutes. What am I gonna do?
This line implied that Genuine Hospital had been a live show, which is not how soap operas are produced. Since the mid-1970s, they have been taped before airing like any other TV series, though over the years there have been a few exceptions where a broadcast wasn't filmed ahead of time. For example, missing or stolen master tapes required actors to perform live for the August 4th, 1983 episode of Search for Tomorrow.
Search for tomorrow.
Some have suggested that this particular mishap had been a deliberate publicity stunt to bolster the soap opera's ratings, perhaps even inspired by Tootsie, which involved a similar situation where that film's climax centered around soap opera actors being forced to perform live. Was everybody ripping off that film in 1983? Even if Genuine Hospital was broadcast live, losing a star before airtime wasn't necessarily the end of the world. Just like traditional stage plays, live TV dramas would have understudies for all their actors for just such a situation as the one seen in this episode. Well, maybe not having their star kidnapped by a foppish lunatic, but things happen to people. Illness, accident, family crisis. The show must go on. So it's very unlikely that the director wouldn't have had someone on standby to assume Victoria Sensible's role. It's funny to think that he saw Scooby and figured he was a better choice than the original understudy. Which makes you wonder what exactly they must have looked like. And even if the production was so short-sighted not to have regular understudies standing by, they certainly would have had a writer available to quickly come up with an altered storyline to explain the missing actor, more than likely assigning whatever lines they had in the episode to a different character. Everyone was reading off cue cards, so it's not like this was an impossible task. In fact, this is all standard for the entertainment industry.
Hold it, Mr. Devine. Just one picture.
Huh? Wait!
Thanks, Mr. Devine. Take a look at this, Daphne. I can't wait to show Uncle Scooby and Shaggy.
They did it again. That is not an instant camera, and even if it was, that photograph is way too large to have come out of it.
Now where is that phantom? He's got to be some...
How'd you know it was him, Daphne?
The photo you took, Scrappy. He was wearing this unusual ring. I saw the same ring on the finger of the phantom when he attacked me.
Another big mistake made by Devine was his choice in jewelry. Setting aside how ugly and inappropriate it was, wearing something so eye-catchingly gaudy both in and out of disguise was just as stupid as wearing the same clothing as the villain. At least in the latter, there's a tiny chance that Devine's apparel was so common that anyone could be dressed that way, much like how today a t-shirt and blue jeans are a popular clothing choice. But nobody else was going to be wearing that god-awful ring.
Maybe I can blow the show off the air.
Nurse, is the window open? I'm feeling a draft. Me too.
Anymore, falling snow on film and television sets is usually rendered with CGI, but at one point, soap flakes were occasionally used to create the effect. This had been considered an improvement from the old days when, among other things, snow was faked using painted cornflakes, gypsum, and even asbestos. Ironically, the most famous actor to play the Phantom of the Opera, Lon Chaney Sr., died from a throat infection he received after swallowing some artificial snow on a film set.
You'll never catch me!
The Wickles effect usually comes into play when the bad guy exhibits superhuman strength while wearing a costume. Here is how Devine managed not to break his legs, jumping to the stage floor from the top of the catwalk.
On the catwalk, yeah.
I'll clobber that guy. Da-da-da-da-da-da!
Finally, flooding the studio with soap flakes and water made the floor wet and slippery, which directly led to the villain's capture. Who needs Fred Jones around to set traps when the bad guy is dumb enough to do it himself? Devine's actions were just one long series of mistakes, beginning with his outfit choice, followed by kidnapping his co-star and the methods he used to disrupt the production. I'm going to be generous and give him half a point for how Sensible remained in the laundry room after he abducted her, despite us not knowing exactly how this was managed. Divine gets a 1.5 out of 5 for the operation. Thus, the Phantom of the Soaps limps away with a final due score of 1.7 out of 5.
Shaggy and Uncle Scooby are TV stars.
Well, yeah, they are, Scrappy. Haven't you seen Scooby Goes Hollywood? This is what the window looked like when it was closed, but here it's clearly open, so the hose should not have been blocked like that. Early 1980s Hanna-Barbera did not give a f***.
Scoobsy, you're a dog!
Okay, so she's a dog.
I would like to take a moment to thank my new paid supporters on Patreon and YouTube and apologize in advance if I mispronounce any names. Solana. Thank you, Solana. Ripper138. Thank you, Ripper138. Your name cuts out there at the end, so I'm guessing you exceeded Patreon's character limit. It's a good thing you're one of my $5 supporters. Joe Goes Over is the best. He's the spooky space kook of Scooby-Doo YouTubers, and f***ing Carl the Stuntman is forever the bane O. Thank you, Joe Goes Over is the best. He's the spooky space kook of Scooby-Doo YouTubers, and f***ing Carl the Stuntman is forever the bane O. Motherly Otto. Thank you, Motherly Otto. The Battery Man. Thank you, The Battery Man. Thank you to everyone helping support my channel. It absolutely means the world to me. If you'd like to help, there's a link to my Patreon page in the video description, or you can click the join button somewhere at the bottom of this video to become a YouTube channel member. But please only if you're comfortable doing so. Supporters receive credit in my videos for as long as they remain a paid member, as well as a personal shout out in the next regular video produced after they join. If you're interested in picking up some clothing or mugs, there's a link to my merch store in the video description. If you send me a photo wearing or holding anything you buy, I would love to include it in my next regular video. This means you are giving me permission to share it if you send it to me. No takebacks. Patreon supporter Andreas Buckley recently sent over some photos of a project he did repainting a dollhouse kit into something more appropriate for the Scooby-Doo-niverse, as well as repurposing some action figures into better use as Scooby villains. You can check out his work on his YouTube channel, which I've linked to in this video's description. The gang are in California to attend a festival reenacting the time when the state was still under Spanish rule. There they watch a play about a swashbuckling masked bandit protecting the citizens from a corrupt government. Later that night while camping, Daphne and Shaggy are arrested by soldiers dressed as Spanish troops from that era. At Scrappy's encouragement, Scooby dons an outfit inspired by the hero from earlier to rescue his friends. What in the hell was that rope attached to? Also, that was obviously just Scooby's voice actor, Don Messick, mimicking a horse. It's so odd that the sound department would make that choice when they already had reliable horse whinnies on tape that they regularly used. Scooby made that same sound in an earlier episode while describing a villain on horseback. This was the third episode this season without a traditional Scooby villain, and although there was a distinct bad guy this time, everything took place in a dream Scooby was having. Thus, once again, all I can do is leave you a few of my thoughts on the mark of Scooby. This episode was another Scooby parody of a popularly prodigious period property. The Zorro franchise started as a pulp magazine serial in the early 20th century before quickly becoming the subject of many films and television series, not to mention the inspiration for other major fictional characters. Zorro was the secret identity of a wealthy pre-statehood California landowner who fought to protect helpless local peasants while wearing a mask and dressed entirely in black. He was basically Batman before that character was created. In fact, Zorro's inspiration for the comic book superhero is so obvious that DC eventually embraced it by frequently having a Zorro film be the last movie young Bruce Wayne watched before his parents were killed. In fact, the most common Zorro film referenced by the comic was The Mark of Zorro, from which this Scooby episode obviously got its title. It's not unusual for Hanna-Barbera to use popular book, film, and television series as inspiration for Scooby episodes, so it cannot be said with certainty what their reasoning was here. However, 2 years before this episode aired saw the release of 2 separate Zorro media: an animated series, The New Adventures of Zorro, produced by rival studio Filmation, and a Hollywood film, Zorro the Gay Blade, which, like The Mark of Scooby, was also a parody. It was also a film beloved by my mother and me, so I covered it years before in a video that annoyed a lot of people. Incidentally, Zorro the Gay Blade also featured Frank Welker as the narrator, so there's another Scooby link right there. There was also a very short-lived live-action series, Zorro and Son, that aired on a rival network just a few months before the Scooby and Scrappy-Doo show began. So while it's possible that Hanna-Barbera planned on riding a wave of popularity by featuring their own talking dog in a Zorro-inspired adventure, it's also just as likely that one of the writers was merely a fan and wanted to make their own Zorro story.
Yippee! Way to go, El Sabueso!
Why is Scrappy dressed like Charlie Brown? Zorro is Spanish for fox, and Sabueso is Spanish for hound, which immediately made me think of the Disney film with the same name. However, while the fox and the hound is called El Zorro y el Sabueso in Latin America, its title is Todd y Toby in Spain, despite both films purportedly using the exact same dubbed language cut. This apparently was due to how there are different dialects and word choices between the two regions despite sharing a common language, and of course there would be. I'm so used to recognizing how different English is between, say, the United States and other English-speaking countries like, well, England and Australia. It never occurred to me that this must be what it feels like for a native of Spain listening to a native of Colombia. Why can't we all just speak Esperanto?
Bon volo al sendi la pordiston lauŝane estas rano in mia video.
Good night, horses.
Hey!
This era of Scooby-Doo isn't exactly famous for maintaining a sense of mystery, and this is a good example of that. Having Scooby go to sleep, followed immediately by a ripple dissolve and heart music, told the audience that everything from that point on wasn't real, eliminating any sense of danger. It would have been a lot more effective to keep viewers in the dark until the very end, possibly waiting until Scooby was trapped in a life-threatening situation with no way out before he awoke to learn he had been safe the entire time. This still wouldn't have made up for the fact that most of the episode had been a cheap dream sequence, but at least it would have been something. I'm not much of a fan of dream sequences.
This looks like a job for the masked bandit El Scoobo!
El Scoobo?
Yeah, and me, your faithful sidekick, Scrappy-Doo.
Instead of Scrappy-Doo, perhaps Scrappy's outlaw name should have been Cinco Patas.
Great! You'll save him with the old swoop down and grab him trick.
Yeah, rope down and grab him. Here comes El Scoobo!
Seriously, what in the hell is that rope attached to? Spanish is not a language I can speak, so I hesitate to bring this up, but every source I could find says that word is misspelled. Comandante should only have one M in it. This also brings up another question. If that sign is in Spanish, why was this sign seen earlier in English?
Look! We can take the stolen tax money and return it to the people!
This is something that's always bothered me, and it's not just this episode at fault. Any Robin Hood type story wherein the hero steals money from a tax collector and gives it back to the poor has the same issue. What's going to stop the bad guys from just going back to the peasants and taking the money again? In fact, it might even be worse for them the second time, because if I was a government thug who just had some flashy masked asshole carve his name on my butt with a sword, I'm probably going to be more than happy to work up my aggression on someone weaker than me who can't fight back.
Prepare to defend yourself. Locally. En garde.
They are presumably in old California when it was under Spanish control, so why are Scooby and the Commandante fighting with French baguettes? Cuban bread is long too, but it's traditionally scored down the center, while baguettes are scored diagonally like what's seen here.
Uh-oh, excess baggage. Bombs away!
No! No!
What in the f*** is that rope attached to? Daphne and Shaggy return to their old high school to attend a carnival. There they encounter a former teacher who has invented a laser beam powerful enough to cut through anything. After entrusting them with the mysterious box, he disappears, as does the massive ruby that powered his laser. Is the missing gemstone connected to the teacher's box and the sinister clown trying to take it from them?
Gee, it sure is great to be back at good old Central High again, right, Shaggy?
Like, yeah, and being at the school carnival is one time I don't mind staying after school.
This is an interesting episode in that it delves a little into the backstory of the current iteration of the gang, providing what I feel is a significant clue as to the status of Fred and Velma. Daphne and Shaggy never mention either of them in this or other episodes, and if there was ever a time to talk about people you went to school with, it would be while visiting that old school. Were the two absent members part of their original friend group? And if so, did they solve mysteries together before Daphne and Shaggy struck out on their own? Or did Fred and Velma spend their high school years hanging out in their own separate cliques, the former with the jocks and the latter with the brainy kids? Or did they form their own mystery-solving duo, solving their own supernatural conundrums accompanied by their own talking animal mascots? It's even possible that neither Fred nor Velma existed in this timeline at all. Yes, I know they make a few guest appearances in the next season, but I'm not convinced the new Scooby and Scrappy-Doo show and the new Scooby-Doo mysteries belong in the same section of the Scooby-Dooverse, as they have completely different series titles. This is why arguing continuity in the Scooby franchise is a fool's errand. Jerry was a student at Central High School, where he was also an assistant for the science teacher, Mr. McDabble. He also helped run the school carnival, where he managed to abduct McDabble after convincing him to take part in a charity dunk tank. This was also Jerry could steal the giant ruby at the heart of the teacher's powerful new laser device.
Like, wow!
Amazing!
We have to be careful. If this fell into the wrong hands, who knows what'll happen?
Then why in the hemorrhaging f*** are you displaying it at a high school carnival with zero security? That's just asking for it to get stolen. Or worse, having some punks use it to cut the school in half. My high school couldn't even keep the senior bell from getting stolen and buried in the woods outside of town for over 20 years. Okay, maybe they had one security guard, but that is still horrendously inadequate for guarding technology that wouldn't be out of place in a James Bond movie. This episode is asking a lot from the viewer. Laser technology has technically been around since the 1960s, but, and not to denigrate the intelligence or ingenuity of high school science teachers, except for you, Mr. Smith, you know why. The idea that McDabble could invent a device as powerful as what's seen in the episode without access to university-level equipment and funding is a bit hard to swallow, like mochi covered in saltine cracker crumbs. Setting aside how unlikely it was for McDabble to have invented such a highly advanced laser beam, where in the hell did he get the ruby? That question has two facets, so to speak. One being the obvious, how could a high school afford such a valuable gemstone? And the other being the not-so-obvious, where was that ruby sourced? Those two questions are linked in an interesting way. Precious stones, and rubies in particular, have been used in laser technology for decades. But despite how popular tropes would have you believe that laser beams commonly rely on such valuable stones to function, in the real world, most of these are synthetic and grown in laboratories.
They grew you in a f***ing lab.
Natural gemstones usually contain flaws that make them unsuitable for use in a scientific setting. By creating their own rubies from scratch, scientists can maintain a level of quality control that doesn't exist in nature, ensuring they have as pristine of a stone as possible. Because gemstones made this way aren't particularly rare, they tend to be worth a tiny fraction compared to their naturally occurring cousins. Rubies used for laser beams are usually not cut like traditional gemstones either, but rather formed in the shape of a boring ruby cylinder or ruby rod. They're also not usually housed outside the device, but are in fact an important element in creating the beam to begin with. I'm no cartoon scientist, but based on what's shown in the episode, in the Scooby-Doo-niverse, they apparently found a way to enhance a laser beam by keeping the gemstone outside of the machine. As mentioned in an earlier video of mine, the largest ruby ever brought to auction sold for over $30 million. It weighed 55 carats and measured roughly a little under 3/4 of an inch, as it was sized for mounting in a ring. As was typical for Hanna-Barbera at the time, McDabble's ruby did not remain consistent, originally appearing to be as large as his hand, then half that size by the end of the episode. At its smallest, the ruby looked to be no less than 3 inches in diameter, putting its minimum weight at around 1,000 carats, which would ordinarily have made it one of the most valuable gemstones in the world. If we use the real-life record-sized ruby as a sample for estimation, even back in 1983, McDabble's ruby could easily have been worth over $100 million. The sheer financial burden that would put on any institution to source a natural gemstone that size would be insurmountable. Thus, the idea that the ruby seen in this episode could have been anything but a synthetic gemstone is inconceivable.
Inconceivable!
Therefore, the ruby powering McDabble's laser had to have been grown in a lab. If that was the case, how valuable was it? Determining the cost of most items from over 40 years ago is usually daunting, and what information there is online can often be conflicting. But some sources suggested lab-grown rubies could often sell for as cheaply as a mere $1 per carat. That would put the value of McDabble's ruby at around $1,000 in 1983, which would equate to a little over $3,000 in 2025. It's possible that Jerry, being a naive high school student, didn't understand the difference between a natural formed ruby and one grown in the lab and thought they would be equally as valuable. Or perhaps he thought he could fool a wealthy buyer into believing McDabble's stone was real. The craftsmanship in cutting the gemstone might have added some value, but overall, the ruby was just not worth the effort of stealing, especially as any buyer capable of spending millions of dollars on a stolen gemstone would no doubt also have had the resources to determine that it was fake. Further exploring the fact that Jerry was a high school student, if the ruby had been real, how would he have even found a buyer for it? It's unlikely he had many contacts in the criminal underworld, let alone one who could point him to someone capable of paying even 1/10 of the alleged value of the gemstone. Indeed, because he was young and presumably inexperienced, anyone crooked enough to help him find a cash buyer would also likely be crooked enough to cut him entirely out of the deal, stealing the ruby for themselves and even, potentially, cutting Jerry entirely out of life itself.
Okay, Mr. McDabble. See you later.
Jerry, being an incurious student, was possibly the biggest downfall of his plan. If he had asked about the value of the ruby at the beginning and was told it was a cheap synthetic, he would never have launched his scheme. After all, if you were in high school and your teacher brought out a massive jewel, wouldn't you at the very least ask how much it was worth? Granted, McDabble seemed like kind of a dick. He might have told Jerry it was a real stone just for his own amusement. Perhaps that's why the science teacher had been laughing while holding it after everyone left.
That's all right, Daphne. Shaggy?
Hey, Mr. McD! You remember me?
How could I forget you?
Mr. McDabble is easily one of the most realistic characters to have ever appeared in the Scooby franchise. As much as we all love the gang, this is probably how most of us would have reacted to having Shaggy as a student.
Well, Mr. McDabble hasn't changed a bit since we were in school, has he, Shaggy?
You two are barely out of high school. How much were you expecting him to change in just a couple of years?
Nope, like he's the same old grouch.
Yeah, I think that's a you thing, Shaggy. The other principal element of Jerry's plan was kidnapping McDabble before stealing the gemstone. I wasn't sure whether to classify this as an F kidnapping, as the science teacher didn't seem to be as friendly to the gang as others have been over the years, and he's not exactly so mean to them to get an E kidnapping designation either. Regardless, it wasn't a good idea, the reason for which I'll discuss later. In many ways, this plotline almost felt like a dress rehearsal for the later direct-to-video film Scooby-Doo and the Cyber Chase. Both took place in a school setting, both featured a teacher betrayed by his student, both featured an energy beam device that was far more advanced than should be possible and worth a ridiculous amount of money. Both also featured inept security guards. Hell, both even featured a carnival setting and a villain with a creepy smile. Overall, while this was a somewhat original plan, insofar as Cyber Chase came out almost 20 years later, it wasn't profitable. Or rather, whatever Jerry could get for the gemstone wasn't worth the hassle he went through trying to take it. The kidnapping wasn't a good idea either, and trying to find a buyer could lead to worse than just being arrested. He gets a 1 out of 5 for the design. I have only 3 words to say about Jerry's clown disguise. John Wayne Gacy. I obviously have more to say about it than that, but this was definitely the first impression I got from the makeup. For those who don't know, John Wayne Gacy was a prolific serial killer who preyed upon dozens of young men and boys in the Chicago area during the 1970s and was executed in 1994. Gacy's notoriety stemmed not only from the number of victims and how he had kept their remains in the crawl space of his home, but also for how he dressed as a clown to perform at hospitals and neighborhood events. Needless to say, the professional clowning industry does not claim Gacy as one of their members, and consider him nothing but an amateur who dabbled in their field. One of the aspects of Gacy's makeup that showed his lack of expertise was how the smile he painted on his face ended in points. Professional clowns generally use rounded tips to keep from frightening children. That's why if you Google "scary clown," most of them will have pointed lips. Gacy wasn't the first evil clown inspiration for pop culture, considering Batman's Joker first appeared way back in 1940. Even the Scooby franchise had one of those long before Gacy first slathered on the grease paint. But you'll notice that even the ghost clown's lips were still rounded. I'm not saying that the artist who designed Jerry's clown disguise was directly inspired by Gacy, but I can't help but notice the similarities, with the aforementioned red pointed lips and the blue makeup surrounding the eyes. It's just as likely that both Gacy and the artist weren't professional clowns or schooled in clown makeup, so they both just happened to hit upon the same design choices any other amateur might have come up with. Inadvertent or not, Jerry's clown makeup was definitely scary. I freely admit a hatred of clowns, and this could be my bias showing, but I'm not alone, as evil clowns are a well-established trope. Even without special effects, Jerry's disguise was frightening as hell, and he deserved full points for that. However, the proliferation of evil clowns in media also worked against him in a way, because it showed his outfit wasn't that original either. It's also unclear if Jerry had been wearing makeup or a mask. It's not an important distinction, but I always find it curious whenever the Scooby Gang reveals a villain by taking off a mask, despite the disguise traditionally being achieved via makeup and not through face coverings.
Get you covered! Clowns?
That was a vat of liquid caramel for dipping apples, which means the temperature was likely anywhere between 160 to 180 degrees. Jerry should be screaming in agony at that point. When Daphne exposed him, she should have not only pulled off the mask, but much of the melted skin on his face. Jerry's clown disguise had no special effects, but they weren't necessary as his costume wasn't meant to be supernatural in origin. It was also plenty frightening in and of itself. Sadly, it wasn't exactly an original villain design in general media, let alone for the Scooby-Doo universe. It's still the scariest one we've seen so far in this entire series, though. So he earns a 4 out of 5 for the outfit. Abducting McDabble was entirely unnecessary, and worse, only put Jerry in further danger of getting caught. Like any kidnapping, Jerry ran the risk of his victim making an escape and returning with the authorities. McDabble might have even recognized his abductor, since a mask wouldn't disguise the wearer's voice and could be knocked off during a struggle.
But the ruby isn't in that box.
It isn't?
I've had it in my pocket the whole time.
Jerry had been in the perfect position to steal the ruby. As McDabble's assistant, he should have been aware of not only when the teacher would be closing the exhibit, but also where the gemstone would be stored for safety. McDabble would have presumably removed the ruby from the laser whenever he left the device alone as a safeguard against potential thieves. So why wouldn't Jerry have known that his teacher kept the stone inside his jacket rather than in a safe or other more secure location?
Ah, how about you, Mr. McDabble? Take a turn on the dunk tank for charity.
Please hold this box for me, and don't let anyone touch it.
Sure, Mr. McDabble.
Give me that box.
Huh? No way, clown! Let go!
It's possible that McDabble didn't trust his student, but you'd think at some point prior to the kidnapping, Jerry would have learned exactly where he could find the stone after hours. The fact that he thought the box held the ruby was evidence that he had never taken the one elementary step needed for successful theft: knowing where the object you planned to steal was going to be.
Here it comes! Bullseye!
Okay, say what you will about him being a grouch. McDabble still allowed himself to get dunked in a water tank for charity. And while still wearing his suit. Respect. Did I even do that right? I don't really do gestures.
Attention everyone, we're about to begin our annual charity raffle. Please have your tickets ready.
Like, oh boy, maybe I'll win.
What is that cat sitting on? It's literally floating a couple of feet off the ground. Early 1980s Hanna-Barbera did not give a fuck. As one helping run the carnival, Jerry was also in another perfect position to steal the ruby. He managed to convince McDabble to sit on the dunking platform, which would have been the perfect time to suggest holding the teacher's box. Logically, McDabble should have agreed to this because Jerry had already been assisting him. Why would he have trusted Daphne, a former student he hadn't seen in years, who was with Shaggy, a former student he obviously didn't care much for, to hold the box when his helper was literally right there? Had Jerry said or done something to McDabble that made him seem untrustworthy? That's unlikely because considering how blunt the teacher was, I doubt he would have pulled any punches to avoid hurting Jerry's feelings if he had felt the student wasn't up to the task of assisting him. If Jerry had managed to get his hands on the box this early, he likely would have opened it then and there and discovered the ruby was not inside. He would have immediately realized it was useless to abduct McDabble, and he would have saved all that pointless running around in the clown disguise trying to snatch the box from the gang. Altering his plans, Jerry could have waited until after the carnival ended to follow McDabble home and simply mugged him while wearing the clown suit. Or even something more simple like a balaclava.
Now give me that box.
I can't. This is stolen property.
Stop playing games and give it to me. I'll have you all expelled for this.
But like we already graduated.
Well, now it's stolen property. The gang had been given that box by McDabble to temporarily hold for him, and as they hadn't opened it, they had no idea what it contained. Refusing to give it back to him, then running away, made them thieves, regardless of their intentions. Jerry had been acting under the assumption that the ruby was worth a lot of money, and he was willing to commit a very serious crime, kidnapping, to steal it. If he had been that motivated, why didn't he do more to take the box from Daphne and the rest? At one point, he literally had his hands on it, and the only thing between him and freedom was a skinny redhead. He didn't necessarily have to resort to excessive violence, but a quick tap would probably have been enough to get her to let go. I am not advocating violence against anyone, let alone a young woman, but speaking entirely from the standpoint of what the criminal could have done to further his scheme, he probably should have been willing to get a little rough. Hell, he already got a little rough earlier when he locked up McDabble. Chivalry is great and all, but if you aren't willing to set that aside when necessary, you might want to rethink this whole villain thing.
Well, let's open it and see.
How about if I open it?
Was Jerry holding his breath underwater all that time, just waiting for the right moment to pop up and scare the gang? That's a clown suit, not a scuba suit. Ultimately, the most critical flaw in Jerry's scheme boils down to one thing. If he had succeeded in stealing the box from McDabble or Daphne, the ruby wasn't even in there in the first place. So even if he had succeeded, he would still have failed.
Get your French peanuts here!
It is so jarring whenever they mess up and reuse the same background plate from the immediately preceding shot.
Boy, oh boy, peanuts!
Like thanks, Scoob?
Those are the most popcorn-looking peanuts I have ever seen. Popcorn, peanuts, pretzels, potato chips. Seifert's makes them all. You'll love Seifert's most of all.
Yikes!
He's gonna get Scooby!
Like that's what he thinks! Carlo! Get you Carlo covered!
Scooby was with Jerry when Shaggy stopped the carousel, but Jerry was the only one who went flying. All I can take away from this is somehow Scooby managed to keep his balance on the ride while the villain was careless enough to be tossed from it. I suppose that should count as a demerit for Jerry, though we never really saw what happened for it to end up like that. Jerry managed to abduct McDabble, but didn't really need to. He didn't research his victim well enough to avoid wasting his time going after a box that didn't contain what he wanted to steal. He lacked the fortitude to act like a bad guy when it was most important, and he got caught in a manner that clumsy old Scooby-Doo of all people was able to avoid. He gets a 1.5 out of 5 for the operation. This leaves the Central High Carnival Clown with a final due score of 2.2 out of 5.
You see, Jerry set up the illusion with that mirror.
Oh, so Mr. McDabble fell on the other side, behind the mirror, where we couldn't see him.
Get it, Scoob?
Absolutely not!
Yeah, like me neither.
That was a pretty straightforward explanation. Are we sure Shaggy even graduated high school? And that's my ranking of the villains from the 4th set of episodes of the 1st season of the new Scooby and Scrappy-Doo show, shown here along with the ones from my previous videos. Remember that line in Jurassic Park when Hammond complained about how the ride went for Grant, Malcolm, and the rest? So much for our first tour. 2 no-shows and 1 sick triceratops. I kind of feel that way about this video. We had 2 episodes that didn't feature a villain, and the 2 that did were just disappointing. If I did the math correctly, there are only 2 more videos left before I finish this season. And while I haven't watched any of the episodes yet, at a casual glance, they're not exactly getting my hopes up. I hope to see you next time. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. If you'd like to help support this channel, there's a link to my Patreon below, or you can become one of my YouTube channel members by clicking the join button. But please only if you're comfortable doing so. Supporters receive credit in my videos for as long as they remain a paid member, as well as a personal shout out in the next regular video produced after they join. There's also a link to my merch store where you can pick up clothing or mugs. If you send me a photo wearing or holding anything you buy, I would love to include it in my next regular video. This means you are giving me permission to share it if you send it to me. No takebacks.
Uh-oh. Here come a flock of wah-wahs.
Wah. Wah, 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 wah. Wah, 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 wah. Wah, 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 wah. Wah, 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 wah. Wah.